Persistent Service Asset, the REDEEMR Plus Dependent Dividend Ledger. A new corporate NOR dossier.
Persistent Service Asset Part 6. Closing Balance. MXTM aka Pirate 1 or VJ Tsunami X. August 6, 2026. Part 6. Closing Balance. Chapter 14, one revision at a time. REDEEMR Plus Lifecycle Stack Holdings. Regional License Agreement. Executed System Node. Synodi_red // Global Expansion Desk Restriction Level. Executive Infrastructure / Board Distribution only equal. Licensee. PT Gria Lanjutan. Operator. Republic of Indonesia Territory. Bali Province. Regency of Badung Licensed IP. Full Lifecycle Stack Architecture. Intake Protocol. SCSF Conversion Specification. Omni-Mesh Firmware. Legacy Simulation Product Line. Finance Model Rev 9 Local Branding. Musim Lanjutan. The Continuing Season. Selected by Operator's Marketing Team following consumer testing across 3 focus group cohorts of recently overwhelmed family caregivers term. 15 years. Renewable royalty. 14% of Operator's gross placement fee revenue. Remitted quarterly to REDEEMR Plus Lifecycle Stack Holdings. SA. Note from Global Expansion Desk. This marks the 11th territory license executed since the program's first international rollout. Local regulatory review has, in each territory to date, uniformly concluded that no existing labor, medical, or guardianship statute contemplates an arrangement of this specific structure, and that no new statute is required until one does. The architecture requires no modification between territories beyond translation and the selection of a locally resonant brand name. The room at the end of the corridor has never needed to change. Jalan Petitenjit. The building reads, from the road, like every wellness retreat within a kilometer of it, pale local stone, a screen of frangipani trees, a gate in soft lowercase script, Musim Lanjutan. Inside, the lounge smells like frangipani and something clean underneath it, and a water feature runs along one wall, loud enough to cover conversation, quiet enough not to seem like it's trying to. Wayan Swartini is filling out a tablet form. A coordinator keeps sliding back across a low glass table, one field at a time. Beside her, her son Kadek folds the corner of a paper napkin into a small, precise triangle, unfolds it, folds it again. A shape that isn't quite a kanong sari, isn't quite anything, just a motion his hands have kept since he was young enough that no one thought yet to wonder whether it meant something or was only ever a hand needing a task. The coordinator's badge reads SRI, and under it, smaller, Family Continuance Specialist, Level 2. There's no wrong pace, Sri says, sliding the tablet back one more field. Some families take an hour, some take a week. We just need the fields completed before intake can proceed. It is, word for word, punctuation for punctuation, the sentence a woman named Gabriella said in a lounge 11 time zones away, to a family whose name Sri has never heard and never will, from a training script that reached her in translation 8 months ago and required, in the translator's own notes, almost no adjustment at all. Some phrases travel whole. Comfort, it turns out, doesn't need to be reinvented per territory. It only needs to be delivered in the local tongue. Wayan looks at the tablet, then at Kadek, folding the same small triangle for the 100th time this hour, and signs the field. A kitchen, elsewhere. Refugio Valenzuela's house has learned, over the better part of 2 years now, to make its sounds on a new schedule. Nothing that fills the 10 o'clock hour the way the hallway lights used to, just the ordinary business of a house with one person living in it, the kettle, the radio she leaves on low some mornings for the company of a voice that isn't asking anything of her. The terminal has stayed in the drawer since the night she pressed the gray button instead of the red one. She has not opened it again. She has also not been able to make herself do what the manual would call the alternative, the red button, the clean end, the thing that closes a session permanently rather than merely pausing it, and she has stopped examining most days why one kind of not deciding feels so different from the other. This morning she waters the plant on the windowsill that used to sit on Mateo's side of the kitchen table, moved there without her quite noticing she'd moved it, and glances, the way she does most mornings now without meaning to, at the hallway, where nothing plays and nothing needs to, because some kinds of listening don't require anything left to hear. She does not know a woman named Wei-in exists. She will never have reason to. REDEEMR plus Lifecycle Stack Holdings, Global Intake Q, Live Status Node. Synodi_red_vault // consolidated territory feed. Tash, 4, Quintana Roo, MX. Q depth, 11 next push, 7 o'clock local MSL, 1, Bali, ID. Q depth, 4 next push, 9 o'clock local DVR2, Gujarat, IN. Q depth, 19 next push, 6:30 local KRB, 1, Mombasa, KE. Q depth, 7 next push, 8 o'clock local, plus 7 additional territories, feed truncated for display. Total units pending intake, all territories, 214 total units active deployment, all territories, 41,208 total units. Long-term consolidation, 6,617. Feed origin unconfirmed. Received via unattributed access. Timestamp live at time of capture. Q continues to update beyond this record. Chapter 15. The Limited Partner. Lakeport Municipal Employees Retirement System, ULMERS, Annual Investment Report, Fixed Income and Alternative Summary, Global Emerging Markets Infrastructure and Hospitality Fund of Funds Allocation, 3.1% of total portfolio assets 5-year annualized return, 11.4% benchmark, 8.9%. Our alternative sleeve continues to deliver strong risk-adjusted returns, outperforming benchmark for the 4th consecutive year, supporting the system's long-term funded ratio targets on behalf of our 40,000 current and retired members. Chief Investment Officer. Letter to members ========================================================================================================================Say has run the same negative exclusion screen every autumn for 6 years. A routine piece of the responsible investment mandate the LMERS board adopted a decade ago under pressure from a retiree advocacy group that no longer exists in any form Daniel would recognize if he met its founders today. The screen checks the system's full holdings list against a maintained exclusion registry, thermal coal, cluster munitions, 3 named private prison operators, a handful of firms with documented forced labor findings from international monitors, and produces every year the same clean report. No exclusion registry matches, full compliance, filed and forgotten by October. He runs it a week later than usual this year, not for any procedural reason, just because a piece he read on his lunch break has been sitting oddly with him since. A follow-up essay by a writer named Pena, shorter than whatever had originally gone viral, about a company called REDEEMR Plus and an ethics advisory board with a seat that had stayed empty for 2 months in a way the piece seemed to think mattered more than anyone at the company wanted it to. He doesn't expect to find REDEEMR Plus anywhere in LMERS's holdings. It isn't a public company. It isn't in any index the system tracks directly. But something in the piece, a line about a fund called Meridian Capital, a Cayman-registered LP, quietly one of the largest institutional owners of hospitality real estate across 3 Caribbean and Southeast Asian markets, makes him do something the annual screen was never actually built to do, which is look sideways instead of down. The look-through problem. The system's negative screen checks direct holdings and named fund managers. It does not, and by design cannot, look through a fund-to-fund structure to the underlying limited partnerships those funds themselves hold, because the underlying LPs are frequently not required to disclose their full holding lists to anyone below their own limited partners, and LMERS is not, itself, a direct limited partner of Meridian Capital. LMERS holds units in a fund-to-funds vehicle, managed out of a Boston office Daniel has spoken to twice by phone, which in turn holds a limited partnership interest in 11 underlying funds, one of which, disclosed only in a footnote of a footnote in a quarterly holdings letter Daniel has filed unread for 6 consecutive years, is Meridian Capital LP. Takes him 4 hours and 2 phone calls to confirm what the footnote implies. It would have taken him considerably longer if the fund of funds manager in Boston, a man named Griffin who has clearly fielded a version of this question before, hadn't been so unbothered answering it. It's a diversified emerging markets sleeve, Griffin says, in the tone of someone explaining something he considers self-evidently reasonable. Meridian's one of 11 names in there. Their hospitality and infrastructure book has been one of the strongest performers in the whole fund of funds for 3 years running. If you're asking whether we've had any regulatory or legal flags on Meridian specifically, no. Nothing. Clean audits, clean filings. Nothing on any exclusion list I've ever seen anyone maintain. There's a piece going around, Daniel says, about a workforce arrangement one of Meridian's portfolio companies uses. I saw it, Griffin says, and there's the smallest pause, not quite long enough to call hesitation. Legal took a look. Nothing in it constitutes a documented violation of any binding standard we screen against. It's look, Daniel, I hear you, but I can't divest a fund of funds position out of one underlying LP based on an op-ed. That's not a standard I could apply to anything in the portfolio and still call it a standard. He isn't wrong exactly in the narrow professional sense the word standard is doing all the work of protecting. Daniel has spent 6 years building his own competence around exactly that kind of precision, and it is a strange thing to feel it turned gently, correctly, against the one question he actually wanted an answer to. The memo. LMER's Investment Committee Memorandum from D. OSE, Responsible Investment Analyst Re, Indirect Exposure Review, Meridian Capital LP, via Gemi Fund of Funds. Summary: recent public reporting raises labor classification and consent questions regarding a workforce arrangement used by portfolio companies of Meridian Capital LP, in which the system holds indirect exposure of approximately 0.34% of total plan assets via the Gemi Fund of Funds vehicle, 5-year contribution to sleeve return, plus 2.1% above benchmark. Findings: 1. No exclusion registry match exists for Meridian Capital LP or any disclosed portfolio company under current system policy. 2. No regulatory action in any disclosed jurisdiction has been taken against the arrangement in question. 3. Underlying legal opinion per fund of funds manager supports current classification of the arrangement as outside applicable labor frameworks in all operating jurisdictions. 4. Full look-through disclosure at the underlying LP level is not contractually available to the system as a fund of funds investor. Recommendation: given the absence of any documented legal or regulatory violation and the fund of funds structure's demonstrated performance contribution, staff does not recommend divestment at this time. Staff recommends the committee direct the fund of funds manager to request enhanced disclosure at next annual review, and that this position be flagged for ongoing monitoring. He writes staff does not recommend in his own name, in his own words, and reads it back twice before sending it, the way you'd reread a sentence to make sure it still says what you meant after you've already decided you can't afford for it to say anything else. There is no line on the system's disclosure forms for the fact that 0.34% of 40,000 people's retirement security is, at this exact moment, resting on a distinction between documented violation and thing that is plainly happening, and Daniel understands, drafting the memo, that his job has never once asked him to have a form for that distinction, only a recommendation. The investment committee meets on the second Tuesday of the month, in a windowless room on the 4th floor, and Daniel's memo is item 7 of 11 on an agenda that also includes a real estate valuation dispute and a proposed change to the actuarial discount rate that will occupy 40 of the meeting's 90 minutes. The discussion of item 7 lasts 6 minutes. A trustee, a retired fire captain 2 years into the job, conscientious, out of his depth on fund of funds structuring in exactly the way every trustee on this board is out of their depth on something, asks whether divesting would create a headline risk for the system either way, staying in or pulling out, and general counsel, present by phone, advises that a divestment decision made in the absence of a documented legal violation could itself expose the board to a breach of fiduciary duty. Claim from members whose retirement security depends on the fund's continued strong performance. So the safest thing legally is to do nothing, the fire captain says, not quite a question. The safest thing, legally, counsel says, is to monitor and revisit if the legal or regulatory landscape changes. The motion to accept staff's recommendation, monitor no divestment action at this time, passes without dissent, and the committee moves to item 8, the discount rate, which will occupy the rest of the meeting and which every trustee in the room understands, correctly, to be the item that actually determines whether 40,000 people's pensions are adequately funded 20 years from now. Nobody in the room is being negligent. Nobody in the room is doing anything except exactly the job the room exists to do. What Daniel keeps. He doesn't quit. He has thought about it in the specific, non-committal way people think about things they've already quietly decided against. He has a mortgage 2 years into its term, a daughter starting community college in the fall, and no employer in his field who would hire him for having once recommended unsuccessfully that his previous fund divest from something with no documented violation attached to it. He understands, with a clarity that surprises him more than the discovery itself did, that Renata Poot's mistake, if it was a mistake, was being close enough to the mechanism to feel her own hand inside it. He is 4 layers removed. The distance is real. It is also, he notices, doing an enormous amount of work he never asked it to do on his behalf. He adds a line to next year's screening methodology memo, buried in a section on structural limitations, noting that fund-of-funds vehicles present a look-through gap the current exclusion registry cannot address, and recommending, again unsuccessfully, again without dissent against the recommendation not to act on it, that the board consider requiring enhanced look-through disclosure as a condition of future alternative investment commitments. It will sit in that memo, unread past its summary page, the way the Meridian footnote sat unread for 6 years before him, until someone else someday reads sideways instead of down. LEDEEMR's member newsletter, winter edition, your retirement, working for you. Great news for LEDEEMR's members. Your Systems Alternatives portfolio posted its 4th consecutive year of above-benchmark returns, helping keep your retirement system on track and fully funded for the 40,000 teachers, firefighters, transit workers, and municipal employees who count on it. Thank you for your years of service to our community. We're proud to keep working just as hard for you, today and in retirement. Chapter 16, The Committee Hearing. Quintana Roo State Legislature. Committee on Family and Social Welfare Public Hearing Notice. Bill SB 2038-114. Family Continuance and Voluntary Service Resolution Act, sponsor. Senator Aldo Cetina, District 7. Purpose. Per sponsor summary to provide legal clarity and expanded protections for families utilizing voluntary continuance care transfer arrangements, and to establish minimum service standards for workforce solutions providers operating within such arrangements. Scheduled testimony. 10 o'clock sponsors opening statement. 10:15 industry panel. REDEEMR plus Lifecycle Stack Holdings. SA. 10:45 family testimony. Support. 11:15 public comment. Opposition. 3 minutes per speaker. 11:45 committee markup session. 1300 hours committee vote note. Written testimony received from 22 individuals and organizations opposed to the bill has been entered into the record per Rule 4.2 and will not be read aloud due to scheduling constraints. The room. Committee room 4 seats 60, and by 9:40 it's full in a way that has clearly been organized rather than arrived at. One side of the gallery in matching sky blue t-shirts reading Grateful Families for SB 114, distributed that morning by a coalition whose filing address, if anyone thought to check it, traces back through 2 shell nonprofits to a REDEEMR plus community relations budget line. The other side is smaller, unmatched, a loose scatter of disability rights advocates, a few caregivers who came on their own dime, a folding chair overflow of people who found out about this hearing through a newsletter rather than a bus that picked them up at 8. Senator Aldo Cetina opens without notes, the way a man opens who has given a version of this speech at 4 other committee hearings this term. 11 years ago, he says, I watched my own mother spend her last good years exhausted past anything a person should have to carry alone. This bill isn't about corporations. It's about giving families like mine, like so many of yours, options nobody had when I needed them. He mentions, without a name attached, a grandmother in this very district, 81 years old, who told our staff it was the first time in 28 years anyone had told her it was enough. The line lands exactly the way it's built to land. A small, murmured stir through the sky blue side of the room, and nobody in committee room 4 has any way of knowing that the sentence began its life as 3 private words spoken into a customer satisfaction call Refugio Valenzuela doesn't fully remember giving months ago to a customer success representative asking, warmly, whether she'd recommend the program to a friend. The industry panel. Esteban Marin, REDEEMR plus S Vice President of Government and Regulatory Affairs, has 30 minutes and a slide deck, and he uses both with the unhurried confidence of a man who has never once lost a committee vote he was allowed to prepare for. Dignity compliance across our current operating footprint sits at 96.4%, he says, advancing a slide. Family satisfaction post-transfer at 91% in independent survey. What this bill does is codify standards our industry already meets voluntarily. Mandatory overseer validation, transparent reconciliation ledgers, guaranteed pension continuity for transferring custodians. We're not asking the committee to create new protections. We're asking you to make permanent the ones we've already built. A committee member, not unfriendly, genuinely curious, a first-term delegate named Osorio who has clearly done some of her own reading, asks the only question all morning that comes close to the center of anything. Mr. Marine, the bill's language refers throughout to transferred kin and voluntary service resolution. Does REDEEMR Plus have a position on whether the underlying arrangement constitutes labor for purposes of existing labor statute? Marine doesn't hesitate because this is the one question his preparation session ran longest on. Delegate Osorio, that's precisely the clarity this bill provides. It establishes a distinct statutory category, continuance service, recognizing that these arrangements don't fit neatly into frameworks written for a labor market these individuals were never going to participate in. We think that's not a loophole. We think that's honesty about a category that didn't exist when those older statutes were written. Osorio writes something down and doesn't ask a follow-up, because the panel's 30 minutes are already running 4 over, and Rule 4.2 scheduling constraints, unlike the industry panels, are enforced. Family testimony. Marisol Chan is not performing anything. That's the part that makes her testimony the most effective 90 seconds of the entire morning, more effective than anything in Marine's deck. She is simply telling the truth as she lived it, into a microphone in front of 60 strangers, and the truth is genuinely moving. My son Emiliano has needed round-the-clock care since he was 2, she says, hands steady on the podium in a way her voice isn't quite. I loved him with everything I had for 31 years. I also buried my husband, lost my house, and hadn't slept a full night since Emiliano was in diapers. This program didn't take anything from me that wasn't already being taken by a system that never once, in 31 years, offered me anything but a diagnosis and a bill. I know what people are saying about this. I lived the alternative for 3 decades. Nobody in that alternative was offering me a kin yield clause. They were just letting me drown, slower. Nobody in the room challenges her because there is nothing false in a single word of it, and the book, if it is honest with itself, has no interest in pretending there is. Her exhaustion was real. Her love was real. The absence of any other door was also real, and it is precisely that absence, not her gratitude for the one door that opened, that the next witness has 3 minutes to try to make the room understand the difference between. Public comment. Andres Tuz uses a speech-generating device, tapping out his testimony in advance and letting it read aloud in an even, synthesized voice while he sits, unhurried, watching the room watch him. He has cerebral palsy, a communication style the hearing's 3-minute rule was not designed with in mind, and 11 years of self-advocacy work behind him that nobody on this committee has read a page of. I want to start by saying Ms. Chan's exhaustion is real, and I believe her. The device says, into a room that has gone slightly more polite and slightly more restless at the same time. I am not here to tell her family what to feel. I am here because this bill creates a legal category called continuance service, and I am the kind of person that category was built to describe. Not Ms. Chan's son specifically. Me. People like me. The chair glances at the clock. 2 minutes remaining shows on the small timer at the witness table, a courtesy extended to every speaker this session, though nobody extended it to Marine's overrun 30 minutes earlier that morning. The bill sponsors keep saying this is about family choice. The device continues at its own even pace, unable to speed up even as the chair's eyes go to the clock a second time. Nobody has asked whether the choice being protected is the family's, or whether it's the choice being taken away from the person the family is choosing about. I cannot consent to this bill. I was never asked to. The bill does not require anyone to ask someone like me anything, at any point in the process it describes, and I would like that fact entered into the record specifically, because, Mr. Tuz, your 3 minutes have concluded. The chair says, not unkindly, reaching for the gavel with the small, practiced regret of someone following a rule rather than making one. Your written testimony is welcome to be submitted in full for the record. The device, mid-sentence, goes quiet. Twos nods once, closes the laptop, and wheels himself back from the microphone without further comment, because there is no version of the next 30 seconds that would get the sentence finished. And he has done this enough times to know exactly which fights are winnable inside a 3-minute clock and which ones simply aren't. His full written statement, 4 pages, considerably sharper and more specific than the 90 seconds anyone in the room actually heard, is entered into the record along with 21 others, filed per Rule 4.2 without being read aloud. Among the 22, a 6-page submission from a writer named X. Pena, cross-referencing chapter and clause, the same ownership structure a compiler's note once called unattributed, now formally logged, formally ignored, in a public record nobody on the dais opens past its cover page. The markup, SB 2038-114, Committee Markup Session, Amendment Log, Amendment 3. Delegate Osorio establishes an independent continuance review board with binding authority to suspend individual transfer approvals pending investigation of reported irregularities. Status: adopted as amended, see Amendment 3A. Amendment 3A, substitute, offered by Committee Counsel following technical consultation with affected industry stakeholders, replaces binding authority with advisory authority. Extends board composition to require 2 industry-nominated seats of 5 total. Removes automatic suspension provision. Review findings shall be considered by the provider at its discretion. Status: adopted, 6-3 Amendment 7. Delegate Osorio requires signed witness consent from the transferred individual where the individual is determined by independent clinical assessment to retain decisional capacity. Status: failed, 4-5, following Committee Counsel's advisory opinion that decisional capacity, as used, lacks sufficient statutory definition to be enforceable and would create immediate legal exposure for providers acting in good faith reliance on existing certification. Delegate Osorio watches Amendment 3 leave the room recognizable and return from technical consultation wearing someone else's teeth, and she votes for the substitute anyway because the alternative, no board at all, a straight up or down floor vote on the unamended bill, is, her own staff has advised her, the worst outcome by every metric that will actually be measured. She has learned, in one committee markup session, the same lesson it took Renata Poot 6 years and 1 recognized reference code to learn. That a small, defensible improvement taken 1 motion at a time is the only kind of improvement this room was ever built to offer, and that voting against it on principle changes nothing except which name is listed as having tried. The vote. The bill clears committee 8-1, Osorio the lone no, not because she believes the final language is worse than nothing. She has convinced herself by 1 o'clock that it probably isn't, that a toothless review board is marginally better than the current absence of one, but because she has decided privately that somebody on this dais should be on record as having wanted more than the room was willing to give. Senator Setna thanks the committee, thanks Ms. Chan by name from the dais, does not mention Mr. Twos, and tells the assembled press outside room for that today's vote represents a landmark step toward dignity and family protection in an area of law that has, frankly, been silent for far too long. Quintana ROO Legislative Lobbying Disclosure, Quarterly Filing, Registrant, REDEEMR plus Lifecycle Stack Holdings, SA Bills Lobbied, SB 2038-114 Lobbying Expenditure. This quarter $412,000 includes direct advocacy, coalition support, Grateful Families for SB 114, Community Outreach Subgrant, Committee Counsel Technical Consultation Fees, Amendment 3A, Written Opposition Testimony Received, Rule 4.2, 22 Written Opposition Testimony Read Aloud in Session, 0 Bill Status, Passed Committee, 8-1. Referred to Floor Calendar. Chapter 17, The Consolidation Center. REDEEMR plus Lifecycle Stack, Facilities Citing Rationale, LTC Network System Node, Synodi_red/forward/facilities_engineering Surnex restriction level, internal/facilities and finance only, JECT, long-term consolidation siting and subject, long-term consolidation siting and staffing. Standard 01. Siting LTC facilities are sited on low-value inland parcels. minimum 30 kilometers from any guest-facing property, selected for land cost, power infrastructure access, and absence of zoning categories requiring public notice or comment. No facility in the current network has required a public hearing, a variance request, or a permit exceeding standard industrial warehouse classification. 02. Staffing LTC units require no task execution capability and therefore no guest-facing grooming standard compliance. See GFGS Policy 2.1. Staffing is limited to automated retrieval and climate systems maintenance. Current network-wide staffing ratio: 1 technician per 1,400 units. 03. Review cadence per Finance Model Rev 9, Section 3. No scheduled reevaluation applies to LTC units absent a triggering event, family-initiated reclamation request, court order, or provider-initiated economic reassessment. No triggering event has occurred, program-wide, since inception. 04. Independent Review Board access per SB 2038-114 as enacted. Board site visits require 10 business days notice and are limited to facilities and records designated by the provider as representative of standard operations. The drive. The coast road gives way 40 minutes inland to a 2-lane highway. Delegate Osorio has never had reason to drive before. Scrub and low forest, a scatter of unmarked agricultural gates. None of the resort billboards that crowd every kilometer of the road she actually knows. Sovereign Regional Consolidation Center 3 announces itself only at the very last turn. A plain steel gate, a guard booth, a numbered placard the size of a license plate. No name on it. No name anywhere she'll come to understand for the rest of the morning. Ibarra meets her at the gate himself, facility operations manager, clipboard, a laminated visitor badge already printed with her name and the 10-day notice provisions file reference number, because the 10 days were spent, among other things, printing exactly this badge. "We don't get many board visits," he says, walking her toward a long, low structure indistinguishable from anything you'd pass on a highway without a second look. Most of the oversight interest lands on the deployment side, the resorts, the guest metrics. This is really just infrastructure. She wants to ask him whether he believes his own sentence. 3 months on the board have taught her that this particular question never produces an answer worth the breath it costs to ask it. The floor. The doors open onto a space that doesn't resolve, at first, into anything her eye knows how to measure. It isn't the size of a warehouse. It's the size of a weather system. Steel racking rising in parallel rows to a ceiling 40 feet up, running back into a dark so complete that whatever wall is eventually out there does not exist for the purposes of standing here and looking at it. No windows. A cool, constant, climate-controlled dark, broken only by the soft blue running lights of automated retrieval gantries gliding along rails between the racks, and a low mechanical hush that isn't quite a hum, because a hum implies one source, and this sound comes from everywhere at once. The collective breathing of some 4,000 climate systems, none of them individually loud enough to notice. 12 tiers, Ibarra says, not waiting to be asked. The tour clearly rehearsed down to the exact beat where visitors always look up first. Automated retrieval on all of them. Nobody climbs a ladder in this building. That's actually one of our better safety statistics, if it's useful for your report. He walks her down the nearest aisle, past pod after identical pod, each one dark, unlit individually, readable only by a small embedded status light, green, steady, and a barcode-style reference plate at the foot. No names anywhere. Reference codes only, the same alphanumeric strings. Osorio has spent 3 committee sessions learning to read as case files rather than inventory, and has spent every night since failing to unlearn again once she's home. 4,100 current occupancy, this facility alone, Ibarra says. Network-wide, we're just under 7,000, last quarter's figure. Power draws down 12% since the last gantry refresh. Happy to walk your report through the efficiency numbers if that's useful. The request. "I'd like to see your longest-held unit," she says. It isn't on the list of representative stops Ibarra's clipboard has prepared, and she watches him recalculate for a half-second before answering. The specific pause of someone deciding whether a request falls inside or outside what his instructions allow him to simply say yes to. "That's not usually part of the tour," he says. But it's a fair audit question. Give me a minute. He pulls a tablet from his belt, taps through what she assumes is a sort by intake date query, and the pause that follows, longer than the last one, tells her before he says a word that whatever's come up isn't a number he expected to have to say out loud to a stranger with a board badge. Row 41, he says. This way. Row 41. The pod sits at shoulder height on the third tier, close enough to reach without the gantry. Ibarra reads the reference plate against his tablet before he says anything, out of habit more than doubt. PSA 9902M, he reads. Consolidated 2 years, for months ago. Active deployment history prior, 6 years, marina and water operations, Cenote Skyfish District. He says it the way he said every other statistic this morning, and Osorio understands, watching him, that he genuinely doesn't yet register this one as different from anything else on the floor. The pod has a viewing panel. She hadn't noticed until now that each unit does. A narrow strip of reinforced glass no wider than a hand. They're presumably for maintenance inspection rather than for anyone standing where she's standing. Through it, a man in his early 50s, though something about the stillness of him makes guessing his age feel like a private failure of her own attention rather than a fact about his face. His hair has grown long enough to curl past his collarbone. Dark going gray at the temple in the specific unhurried way 2 years and 4 months with no barber and no protocol requiring one will do to a person. His nails, resting against the pod's lining, have grown well past anything a guest-facing grooming standard would ever tolerate. A compliance category that stopped applying to him the moment his reference number cleared a routing decision at 12:41 in the morning, alone, unwitnessed, exactly on schedule. His eyes are closed. His chest rises, she can just make out, at an interval slow enough that she counts 11 full seconds before it moves again. There is no cord at his wrist. She has no way of knowing there was ever supposed to be one, and stands at the panel anyway with an unaccountable certainty that something is missing from the picture in front of her that she can't name and won't be able to explain later, in whatever language the board's report format will accept. Is he? She starts and doesn't finish it, because she isn't sure which word belongs at the end of that sentence, and every one she tries in her head sounds either too clinical or like something Ibarra would have to correct. He's within certified range, Ibarra says, answering the question she didn't finish anyway, in the gentle, practiced tone of a man giving the only answer his training ever equipped him to give. Vitals are stable. That's the whole standard we maintain against at this stage. There's no clinical concern on file. 2 years, she says. Has anyone reviewed the case since it was routed here? He checks the tablet more out of habit than expectation, already knowing the shape of the answer before the screen confirms it. No triggering event on file. No family request. No court order. Routing stands until one of those occurs. And if none of them ever do? He doesn't answer that one. Not evasion, she understands, watching him. The question simply doesn't have a professional answer built into anything he was trained to say, and inventing one on the spot would mean doing, alone, in a warehouse aisle, the one thing the entire architecture around them was specifically built so that nobody would ever have to. The report. Independent Continuance Review Board Site Visit Report, Excerpt, Facility, Sovereign Regional Consolidation Center 3, submitted by Delegate X, Osorio, Independent Seat. Finding. Facility operations appear consistent with disclosed staffing and safety standards. No violations of current certified operating range identified during site visit. Advisory note, Osorio recommend the board consider a mandatory periodic reevaluation requirement for units held in long-term consolidation beyond 24 months, absent a triggering event, given the absence of any such requirement under current provider policy. Provider response. Attached per board procedure REDEEMR Plus appreciates the board's attention to this matter. A mandatory reevaluation cadence would represent a material change to finance Model Rev. 9 and would require actuarial restatement across the full LTC portfolio. Provider recommends this note be tabled for further study pending cost impact analysis. Board vote on advisory note. 3-2 to table. Industry nominated seats. Table. Independent seats. 1 table, 1 against. Chair. Tie-breaking. Table. Next scheduled review. Q3. Next calendar year. Chapter 18. The Second Ledger. REDEEMR Plus Consumer Products Division. Legacy Simulation Clone Passive Wellness Signal. Product Analytics Brief Restriction Level. Internal/growth and lifecycle marketing only equal. Subject. Custodian-side signal capture. Legacy simulation sessions 0-1. Background. Every legacy simulation session captures full audio from both parties for quality assurance purposes. Per Section 9 of the Standard Activation Agreement. Opt-out available. Uptake to date 0.6%. 0.2. Signal extracted. Custodian-side beyond sentiment scoring. CCX Advisory 119. Custodian-side audio is passively screened against a validated speech battery for early markers of cognitive decline. Word-finding latency, syntactic simplification, repetition frequency, topic perseveration. 0.3. Elder continuance routing custodian accounts crossing threshold on 2 or more markers, sustained across 3 consecutive sessions, are flagged for elder continuance outreach. A dedicated pre-intake channel offered to former kin yield and service deck custodians, who convert at 4.1x the rate of cold outreach per historical data. 0.4. Rationale. A former custodian already understands the product. She does not require the onboarding investment a first-time family does. In many cases she has been, without knowing it, the single best qualified lead in our entire funnel. For years, sometimes, before she ever hears from us. 7 years on. The market on Calle Andromeda hasn't changed its layout since before Mateo was born, which is precisely why Refugio has walked to it 3 mornings a week for longer than most of its current vendors have been alive. Past the tortilleria, left at the corner with the dead almond tree nobody's replaced, straight until the smell of cilantro tells her she's arrived. She could do it with her eyes closed. She has, in fact, more or less done it with her eyes closed for the better part of 60 years, her feet finding the route the way Mateo's hand once found the spoon. A competence so old it no longer asks anything of the mind that used to have to learn it. On a Thursday in April, 88 years old, she comes out of the market with her bag of tomatoes and coriander and stands on the corner with the dead almond tree, and for the length of time it takes her heart to complete perhaps 4 beats, she does not know which way is home. Passes. That's the part she will not be able to explain properly to anyone later when she decides, and she does decide eventually to tell someone because 88 years have taught her that the things you don't say out loud are the ones that get to keep deciding what they mean, that it passed in 4 beats, 5 at the most, and her feet simply resumed the route on their own the way they always have before her mind had finished being frightened. She gets home. She puts the tomatoes away. She sits at the kitchen table for a long time afterward with her hands folded in her lap, doing the small fine tremor they've done for years now, and does not examine out loud to herself what 4 beats of not knowing which way is home might be the first sentence of the call. The terminal has stayed in the drawer for most of the 7 years, dark most days, though not every day. There have been Mother's Days she couldn't bring herself to skip, a birthday or two when the silence in the house got loud enough that even a scripted, patient, endlessly available voice felt better than none, and each time she has pressed the gray button rather than the red one when she was done. The way she has for 7 years, telling herself it's because she doesn't want to hear the activation chime again, and knowing somewhere underneath that story that it has never really been about the chime. The call comes on a Tuesday afternoon, not through the terminal at all but on the plain telephone in the hallway. A number she doesn't recognize, a voice warm and unhurried in a register she would know anywhere now, in any building, in any language, for the rest of her life. Senora Valenzuela, this is Andrea, from REDEEMR Plus Family Services. I hope I'm catching you at a good time. She should hang up. She understands this immediately, with a clarity that surprises her. A clarity she did not have, could not have had 11 years ago in a gold and cream lounge with a tablet sliding back and forth across a glass table. She has had 7 years since then to learn exactly what that voice sounds like when it's circling something it hasn't said yet. How can I help you? Refugio says, instead of hanging up, because some part of her, the part that has never once, in 7 years, stopped needing to know exactly how much the house already knows, wants to hear it get said out loud. We do periodic wellness check-ins with families who've used our continuance services in the past, Andrea says. It's part of our ongoing commitment to the people we've worked with. I did want to mention, and please don't take this the wrong way, it's just something our systems flag for us to ask about gently, We've noticed in your recent calls with your legacy simulation that some day-to-day things might be feeling a little more effortful lately. Word finding, that sort of thing. It's incredibly common at your age, and I want to be clear there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Refugio stands very still in the hallway, in the exact spot where a sound used to rise and fall on its own 7 years ago, up 2 notes, down 2 notes, and understands in the space of that one sentence 3 things at once. That the terminal has been listening to more than her grief this whole time. That it has been listening specifically for this, and that somewhere in a building she has never seen, in a division whose name she is hearing for the first time, an account with her own name. On it has been quietly accumulating exactly the kind of number the tablet on that glass table once turned green for Matteo. "I appreciate you calling," she says, and her voice does not shake, though her free hand, resting against the wall, does. "We have a program called Elder Continuance," Andrea says gently, the way you'd finally set down something you've been carrying carefully the whole call. "Given your history with us, and honestly, Senora, your satisfaction scores from the original transfer were some of the highest we've ever recorded. You'd qualify for expedited, no-obligation enrollment. It's just a conversation. There's no pressure at all. A lot of our families find it brings real peace of mind, knowing the options there before it's ever actually needed. Peace of mind provided." She doesn't say it out loud. She recognizes it anyway, the exact shape of a sentence she has heard rearranged into 100 other sentences across 11 years. Always arriving gently, always arriving first, always arriving before the thing it's describing has finished becoming true. The ledger, hers. She sits at the kitchen table after the call ends, the same table where she watched a number resolve to 0 11 years ago and told herself, for a while, that 0 meant something like peace. She thinks about the pension REDEEMR Plus still deposits without fail on the 1st of every month. The one piece of that transaction that has never once faltered, the one column on that old ledger that has kept its promise longer and more reliably than almost anything else in her life since. She has lived 7 years on that money. She has bought her groceries with it, paid for the roof repair after the last hurricane season, kept the lights on in a house that stopped needing as much light the day Matteo left it. She understands, sitting here now with a clarity she resents more than she's ever resented anything, that the same machine that would very much like to fold her, gently, expediently, into its next quarter's intake numbers is also the machine that has kept her fed for 7 years, and that these two facts occupy the exact same ledger, the exact same company, the exact same warm and patient voice on the other end of the exact same kind of call. She thinks about Matteo counting the ceiling lights in that lounge. She thinks about the hallway, 7 years of an interval rising and falling in a house where no one hums it anymore, and how long she let herself believe it was the pipes. She does not call Andrea back. She does, however, get up from the table, walk to the drawer, and take out the terminal for the first time in months. Not to call anyone, not for a birthday, not because the silence in the house has gotten loud. She turns it over in her hands, feeling for the seam of the little cradle port on its underside, the one the manual calls a service access panel and warns, in small print she's never bothered reading until tonight, voids the device's activation agreement if opened by anyone outside authorized personnel. She has spent 28 years opening things she wasn't authorized to open. Stubborn jars. A stuck hip joint's worth of physical therapy exercises no doctor thought she'd manage. A spoon that took 11 months of somebody else's small, uncooperative hand. She finds the seam. She works a kitchen knife into it, patient, unhurried, the way you'd work at something you'd decided, quietly, sometime between the phone call and this exact moment, that you were finally going to finish. What she doesn't finish. It doesn't come apart easily. The casing is built the way everything REDEEMR Plus builds things. Smooth, seamless, designed to discourage exactly the kind of curiosity currently working a paring knife into its side at 11 o'clock at night in a kitchen 7 years quieter than it used to be. She manages, eventually, to pry the back panel free and finds underneath it nothing that looks like a voice or a memory or a boy who used to count. Just a small, dense board, a scatter of components she has no name for, a single blinking light, green, steady, the same green every other light in this whole story has ever turned. She doesn't know what she expected. She sits with the ruined casing and the small, stubborn board still blinking in her lap for a long time, and understands, finally, holding the actual physical fact of the thing in her 2 hands, that there was never anything in here to destroy that would undo what it already took, or what it's already sent back, quietly, for 7 years, to a building she'll never see, About a woman it has apparently been getting to know better than she's been getting to know herself. She sets it down on the table anyway, the small green light still blinking, unbothered, unkillable by anything a kitchen knife can reach, and reaches instead for the plain telephone on the wall, the same one Andrea called on that afternoon, and dials the number back. "Andrea," she says, when the voice on the other end answers, warm, unhurried, entirely unsurprised to be hearing from her again so soon. "I'd like you to take my name off whatever list put you on my phone today. Of course, Senora Valenzuela." Andrea says, gentle as ever, not remotely thrown, the way water isn't thrown by a hand trying to hold its shape. "I'll flag your file right now. I do just want to say, there's no obligation at all, ever, and if anything changes, or if you'd just like someone to talk to, our door is always open." Refugio hangs up without answering that. She sits back down at the table across from the small blinking light and does not throw it away that night, though she thinks about it and does not turn it back on either. REDEEMR Plus Family Services or Elder Continuance, PRE Intake Profile. Subject Ref, Valenzuela, R. Former Custodian, KIN Yield. Original Transfer SAT. 98.4%. Historical High. District, Wellness Signal. 2 markers. Sustained, Word Finding, Repetition, Outreach Status. Contacted, Declined, Opt-down requested. Flag, Do not call honored per policy. Passive signal monitoring continues per Section 9. No opt-out on file for signal capture. Distinct from outreach preference. Retry cadence. 90 days, or upon signal escalation, whichever occurs first. First. Discussion about this episode. Comments. Restax. Recent episodes. Persistent Service Asset Part 2 to 5. 14 hours ago, Tomorrow's Canon, the MX Teamverse Anthem. August 4th, I the Omnilogic. August 3rd, the Continuance theme song. August 2nd, MXTM Studios announces preliminary pre-production of the Continuance. August 1st, Sueño de Tuberia Reader's Digest. August 1st, Sueño de Tuberia Part 6. August 1st, The Longevity Principality. Trailer. August 1st, Copyright 2026 MXTM and Vitsu aka Martin Chartrand. Privacy for reading MXTM's newsletter. Subscribe for free to receive new posts and support my work.
Why atone when you can architect?
The REDEEMR Pro protocol allows for real-time visualization of the data matrix directly through the Smart Paper interface, streamlining analysis.
The map beneath the map: why the future is always built by pirates.
In the ruins of the old world, we built our own. Sun-powered, self-sustained, and free.